Have you ever noticed that the person who speaks the least often commands the most attention? Not louder, not faster, just undeniable. Here at Stoic Lighthouse, we don't chase quick fixes or empty promises. We seek clarity, direction, and inner calm in a chaotic world. Most people believe influence comes from saying the right words at the right time. But the Stoics understood something far more unsettling. The more you speak without discipline, the more you dilute your own power. Marcus Aurelios observed that a man reveals himself not when he speaks brilliantly, but when he cannot stop speaking at all. Better to trip with the feet than with the tongue, because every unnecessary word is a leak. Every impulse to respond is a loss of control, and every attempt to prove yourself weakens your presence. But what if silence isn't passive? What if it's the sharpest form of control you have? In this video, you'll discover why speaking less is not about holding back, but about choosing your moments with precision, and how mastering silence can make people listen before you even say a word. Number 1. The noise trap. Why most people talk themselves into irrelevance. Most people don't lose respect because they say something wrong. They lose it because they say too much. Watch closely in any room. The ones who constantly explain, justify, and fill every silence are rarely the ones people trust. Not because they lack intelligence, but because they lack restraint. And restraint is where authority begins. The Stoics saw speech not as a right, but as a responsibility. Every word should serve a purpose, yet today, silence makes people uncomfortable. So they rush to fill it, exposing their insecurities without realizing it. Seneca warned, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." That anxiety you feel in silence, the urge to jump in, to prove yourself, to not be overlooked, it's rarely real, but reacting to it has real consequences. Because the moment you speak to relieve your own discomfort, you stop speaking with intention. You start leaking signals. You signal neediness instead of certainty. You signal insecurity instead of control. You signal noise instead of clarity. And people pick up on this instantly, even if they can't explain why. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The more you try to be heard, the less weight your words carry. Silence, on the other hand, does something different. It creates tension, it creates anticipation, it forces others to lean in. And in that space, something subtle shifts. You are no longer competing for attention, you are controlling it. If this way of seeing life is resonating with you, it's because you're not just looking for external answers. You're trying to live with more awareness. This channel exists for exactly that reason. So the real question isn't, do you have something to say? It's, is it worth breaking your silence for? Number 2, nature's math. Why power listens more than it speaks. There is a reason you were given 2 ears and only 1 mouth. It wasn't an accident. It was instruction. Most people treat conversation like a performance. They wait for their turn to speak, not to understand. They interrupt. They anticipate. They reload their next sentence while the other person is still talking. And in doing so, they miss the only thing that actually gives them an advantage: information. Epictetus made this painfully clear. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. Listening is not passive, it is strategic. When you truly listen, you begin to see patterns others miss. You notice hesitation, contradictions, emotional reactions. You understand what people value, what they fear, and what they're trying to hide. And once you see clearly, you don't need many words, because a single precise sentence placed at the right moment outweighs 100 careless ones. But here's where most people fail. They listen just enough to reply, not enough to understand. And that's why their words feel generic, predictable, replaceable. There is no weight behind them. Powerful communicators do the opposite. They absorb first. They speak last. And when they finally do speak, the room adjusts, not because they are louder, but because they are accurate. This is the hidden mathematics of nature. The less you waste, the more it's worth. The same applies to your words. Every sentence you don't say increases the value of the one you eventually choose to deliver. So the next time you're in a conversation, resist the urge to jump in. Let others reveal themselves. Let silence do its work. And then, only when it truly matters, speak. Number 3, the discipline of pause, mastering the moment before you react. There is a moment so small that most people never notice it, but it controls everything. It happens right before you speak, right before you react, right before you interrupt, defend, explain, or justify. And in that fraction of a second, your entire character is revealed. The Stoics had a word for this power: prohairesis, the ability to choose your response instead of being dragged by impulse. Epictetus taught, "It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them." Yet most people never experience this freedom because they skip the pause. Someone challenges them and they react. Someone disagrees and they defend. Someone questions them and they rush to explain. Not because it's necessary, but because it's automatic. And automatic behavior is the opposite of control. The pause breaks that pattern. It creates space between stimulus and response. And inside that space, something rare appears: choice. When you pause, even for a second, you signal something powerful. You are not being controlled by the moment. You are evaluating it. And people feel this immediately. There's a difference between someone who reacts and someone who decides. One is predictable, the other is dangerous. Marcus Aurelios reflected, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. But that power is useless if you never access it, and you access it through the pause. Not a long, dramatic silence, just enough to break the chain, enough to ask yourself, is this worth responding to? Is this the right moment? Is this the right tone? Because not every invitation deserves acceptance. Not every comment deserves a reply. Not every challenge deserves your energy. The disciplined mind understands this. And over time, something shifts. You stop reacting to everything. You start choosing what matters. And when you finally speak, it's no longer an impulse, it's a decision. Number 4, the Socratic filter. When speaking is worse than staying silent, not everything that can be said should be said, and yet most people never question this. They speak because something is true. They speak because something is interesting. They speak because they feel the urge. But truth alone is not enough. There is an old story about Socrates that reveals a brutal standard for speech. Before sharing information, he would pass it through 3 filters. First, is it true? Second, is it good? Third, is it useful? If it failed any of these, it wasn't worth saying. Simple, ruthless, effective. Now compare that to how most conversations happen today. People share things that are true but harmful, interesting but irrelevant, emotional but unnecessary. And every time they do, they dilute their credibility. Because speaking is not neutral. Every word either builds your presence or erodes it. Zeno taught that the wise man speaks only when his words are better than silence. That is a much higher standard than most people are willing to accept, because it requires discipline. It requires letting go of the need to participate in every conversation, to have an opinion on everything, to fill every gap. And most importantly, it requires comfort with being misunderstood, because sometimes the strongest position you can take is no position at all. Silence filters for you. It removes what is impulsive. It removes what is unnecessary. It removes what is weak. What remains is rare, and rare things carry weight. So before you speak next time, don't just ask if it's true. Ask if it earns its place in the silence you're about to break. Number 5, presence as power. When your body speaks louder than words. Before you say a single word, you are already being judged. Not by what you know, not by what you've done, but by how you carry yourself. Most people think communication starts when they speak. It doesn't. It starts the moment they enter the room. Your posture, your eye contact, your stillness, your ability to remain composed under pressure, all of it is speaking. long before your voice does. And here's the problem. If your body is restless, your words lose credibility. If your gaze is unstable, your message feels uncertain. If your presence is weak, no sentence can compensate for it. The Stoics understood that discipline was not just internal, it had to be visible. Musonius Rufus emphasized that philosophy should be seen in action, not just heard in words. Because people don't trust what you say, they trust what you demonstrate. A calm presence signals control. A grounded posture signals confidence. A measured gaze signals awareness. None of these require you to say anything. And that's where real power begins, because when your presence is strong enough, something unusual happens. People start listening before you even speak. They give you space. They expect something meaningful. They assume weight behind your words. And now, silence is no longer empty. It becomes pressure. But if your presence is weak, the opposite happens. You feel the need to compensate, to explain more, to convince harder. And that only makes things worse, because authority is never forced. It is recognized. So instead of focusing on what to say next, focus on how you exist in the moment. Because when your presence speaks clearly enough, words become optional. Most people spend their lives trying to be heard. Few ever learn how to be listened to. And the difference has nothing to do with talent, intelligence, or charisma. It comes down to one thing: control. Control over your words, control over your impulses, control over your presence. Because when you remove what is unnecessary, what remains becomes powerful. Seneca wrote, "Silence is a lesson learned by the many sufferings of life." But you don't need suffering to understand it. You just need awareness. Awareness of when speaking adds value and when it only exposes weakness. Awareness of when silence creates tension and when it creates authority. And most of all, awareness that not every moment deserves your voice. Everything external can be taken from you, but the discipline you build within yourself becomes untouchable. If this reflection stayed with you, consider subscribing and continuing this journey with our community. Let Stoic Lighthouse guide you toward calm, clarity, and wisdom. Before you go, ask yourself this: are people truly respecting you or simply reacting to you? Because in the next video, we're going to dismantle the uncomfortable truth behind what most people confuse with respect, and why silence alone isn't enough to earn it. Remember, wise men speak because they have something to say. Fools because they have to say something. Until the next video,